Hello and welcome to this week's Natural Gardening Live with me, Josie Rainbird, your natural gardening coach. Today we are joined by Dr Anton Rosenfeld, Research Manager for Garden Organic, where he's worked for almost 20 years. His work has ranged from projects with commercial field growers to small-scale community gardens and allotments. He has worked as a grower, runs many training courses and regularly writes for Grow Your Own and Kitchen Garden magazine. Anton has a passion for soil, composting and growing his own veg, from a wide range of cultures and horizons. So I'm very pleased to be welcoming him onto the show today. It's great to have you here today. I believe you're going to be talking to us about green manure and how it can support the soil and the plants growing in your garden. But before we get into that, if you can tell us a bit about yourself and what drew you to organic gardening or gardening in general.
Well, actually, I had gardening in my blood, really, because my stepfather used to grow a lot of his own veg at home. And so just as a toddler, even, I was just always there and helping him to grow food. And it was just a really nice setting. And also, when I went on walks with him as well, he used to just sort of show me various plants. So I've always had an interest, really. I ended up studying at university as well, studied plant sciences. And I've worked at various places. My first sort of brush with organic gardening was in the 1990s. I went on a working holiday. In fact, I went and worked on a biodynamic farm in the Netherlands, just outside Hilversum, and just seeing the range of sort of healthy produce that was being produced there, and it just really made me realise that that organic growing in general was a really sort of possibility. It was a sustainable thing to do, and it just seemed like a really nice environment to be in. So and now it really just seems to be the norm. Everybody's trying to grow sustainably, really. I think it seems to be more in the minority. I know people who want to go and douse their gardens in pesticides and things.
Just lovely to hear, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's reassuring.
Organic and sustainable growing is it's, part of the pun, more obtainable now rather than sustainable. So it's really nice that there are it's becoming more of a realistic view for new gardeners. They take it on rather than going, no, a chemical will do a much more efficient job of taking care of my garden. They're much more open to the idea of actually nature can do it just as well. So it's really lovely to when I hear people say that. It's nice that we've progressed that far.
I think it's part of a mindset as well. We're getting away from that sort of, we have to have a perfect lawn. It mustn't have any daisies or dandelions in it. I mean, I must admit, I get just as much joy in the garden sort of watching a hoverfly flying around as picking a tomato. It's all part of the same experience.
Exactly, that's it. And if you have just got a plain, I know that nothing's wrong with a plain lawn, don't get me wrong, but if you haven't got anything of interest, no clovers or anything growing in the lawn, there's more of a single, not ecosystem within there, but it's a single body of things. So it's not as exciting to see for a start off. Having a daisy or two in the lawn is lovely to see. And there's more offering and stuff for the insects that live in your garden, a few daisies dotted around as well. So it's much more diverse than it is just having a straight, clean, green lawn. Which
plain green leaf lawn is a monoculture, really, isn't it?
That's the word, monoculture.
For the bees or hoverflies in there, is there?
No, well, that's it, exactly. Much more of a nicer environment for them. It's beneficial for the garden as well as our lives, definitely. So, green manure, what we're here to talk about today, which is perfect. One of those subjects that I've been trying to work into a video at some point, but it's not easy to create a subject around, if that makes sense. So I'm quite keen to be talking about that today. So I'm very pleased that you brought that to my attention. So I believe green manure is a fantastic and thoroughly overlooked resource for the garden. It can offer many benefits, ways of supporting the plants growing in your garden, the soil, specifically in your veg patch. And can you tell me a little bit more about what you'll be talking about today about green manure and what types would you recommend for a domestic vegetable patch?
Well, perhaps I should start with just saying what a green manure is, because often there's quite a bit of confusion. People might think a green manure is, it's a confusing word, having the word manure in it, because green manure is actually, it's a plant that's grown to improve the soil. There's no manure involved in it at all. So it's that's the main thing. It's a plant that you grow, and it's especially to sort of benefit the plants which are going to be growing in the future. Green manures have been around for a really long time. I mean, there's records of them in the Roman times, even, of people sort of growing lupins and then digging them in. So it's only really with industrialized agriculture when we sort of invented synthetic fertilizers, that green manures sort of took more of a back seat. So I should say a little bit about how to grow them at first. So whenever there's a sort of bare patch of land, really, you want to try and avoid having bare soil in your garden whenever ever possible. There's lots of reasons for that. Whenever there's a patch of bare soil, it would be better off if you could be growing a green manure at that time. So often people have patches of bare soil over the winter in the garden, so that's a common time that people might grow a green manure. So perhaps in the autumn time you might sow some green manure seeds. So you might sow something like grazing rye or vetch. Sometimes it's called winter tares. Those are plants which grow quite well over the winter. So you sow them in the early autumn, late summer, and you let them grow over the winter. And then when it comes to the springtime, you cut them down, and then you can either dig them in, or you can mix the sort of green, sort of chopped up residues with a bit of compost, and then that will then release the goodness for the next plants which are growing. So you need to do this while they're still sort of quite green and lush. You don't want them to get sort of hard and woody. They become very difficult to incorporate then. So you really need to be incorporating these green manures about at least a month before you're going to put in your next plants. So if you're going to be putting things in let's say May sort of time, planting out some, I don't know, some chard or some kale or something, you'd need to have sort of chopped down your green manures sort of in March, really, just to give it time to sort of break down. That's the simplicity of it, really. You're just growing something where there would have been a space, and then these plants are doing all sorts of great things to the soil in that time. Perhaps I should say a little bit about what these green manures are doing to the soil. There's all sorts of things that they do. One of the most important things is over the winter, a lot of the sort of nutrients in the soil can get washed out, and that's particularly a problem. I think it's increasingly a problem because we end up with really quite warm and wet winters now, sort of mild wet winters, get flooding, and that just washes loads of sort of soluble nutrients out of the soil. But if you grow a green manure, what it does is it will take up those nutrients and sort of hold them there so that they don't get washed out. And then when you chop the green manure down, it will release the nutrients back out for your next load of plants. So it's really important for that. The other thing they do over the winter is to protect the soil surface. So what can happen is if you leave the soil surface bare, what happens is raindrops, the pounding action on the soil surface, it ends up sort of pulverizing all the fine aggregates in the soil, and it can cause it to sort of glue together, and then that forms a hard crust on the surface, and that can cause you a lot of problems in the summer then. Because what happens is you've got this hard surface on the soil, and then any sort of moisture then will just run off the surface or evaporate. So you're making a soil less resilient if you leave it bare over the winter. So what a green manure will do is protect your soil, and so that your surface of the soil will not end up getting all sort of capped and crusty. The other thing that green manures do, they do lots of things, but one of the other things that they do is to they break up a lot of these sort of hard parts of the soil, and they improve its structure basically. So there's some green manures which have got lots of fine roots. So grazing rye is a good example there. It's a grass, it's got a very fine sort of root system, and it'll help to sort of break up some of the large aggregates into smaller aggregates so that the plant roots can go through them. So it helps improve the soil structure. And then a lot of these green manures are legumes. So they, like vetches, a lot of the clovers are white clover, red clover, all the trefoils, all those sort of plants are legumes. And what that means is that they have got they basically form an association with bacteria, the rhizobia bacteria. And what happens is these bacteria will fix nitrogen from the air, and then the plant takes up that nitrogen, and then when you cut the plants down or dig them in, that nitrogen then gets released for the next plants. So in effect, they are acting as a fertilizer. These plants are taking nitrogen from the air. There's plenty of nitrogen in the air, but the plants can't get at it. So these bacteria help the plants to sort of get at the nitrogen, convert it into forms that the plants can get at. And so that's a really important function of sort of all the legume plants as well. So yeah, they do lots of really important things, green manures. So I think as a sort of all-round dependable one, I quite like vetch. It's quite, it's quite quick to establish. It covers the ground quickly, so it competes against weeds. It is also a legume, so it fixes nitrogen as well. The one thing about vetch is that you do need to really get it sown by the first week of September. If you sow it later than that, it never really establishes properly. So that's just something to be aware of when you're putting in your green manures. I like Phacelia as well. That's a plant which is good for sort of protecting the soil surface. So over the winter, it also produces these lovely purple flowers in the spring, which attract loads of bees. So that's a nice one. We found that Phacelia's not completely frost hardy either. So it depends a little bit on when you've sown it. It's one of these things that if you've sown it early, sort of, let's say towards the end of the summer, and it's been allowed to get quite big, then if there's a frost, it will just knock it down. Those big plants are just not frost hardy. But where if you've sown it a little bit later, sort of early autumn, and the plants are still quite small, then if there's a frost, they're able to take it. So what we found that happened this year is we had a really mild autumn, and the Phacelia plants all grow huge, and then in December we had this really nuclear frost, and it just wiped them all out. Basically, that was just.
And now we're having snow now. Then really got a hope, have they?
Yeah, just as sort of as the icing on the cake or the snow on the cake. So yeah, it's these sort of things that you learn, really. I think you need a bit of a crystal ball as well. You can never get it all right all the time. We like to sort of grow mixtures as well. Is good for biodiversity. It's good in a number of ways. It's good to have a diverse range of plants growing there. You've got different flowers and things like that as well, and also it hedges your bets. If one of them emerges but another one doesn't, you've at least got something that's growing there.
That's it. And I suppose it's nice with the mixture as well, where you've got taller growing or deeper rooting as well, and then a more ground cover and shallower rooting. They all kind of complement each other as well. They don't struggle or fight for space and things like that. So that can help.
That's exactly it. Yeah, you can sort of combine your functions by having more than one thing there. So quite often a common one that's grown is a mixture of grazing rye and vetch. So the vetch is good at fixing the nitrogen, and it covers the ground more, whereas the grazing rye is taller, but the grazing rye is really good at taking up the nitrogen and stopping it being leached out. So it's sort of helping protect the soil against leaching. So that's a really common one that's grown. I find that mixture, it's really good in an agricultural situation when you've got like a rotavator that's going to rotivate it all in. For a gardener, sometimes I don't think it's always quite so cool with grazing rye. It can get really tough. You've got that window about sort of March time to really chop it down. If you chop it down too early, it just sprouts back up again. If you chop it up too late, because basically what grazing rye is, it's a cereal. It's like the rye you're putting into bread. And so it starts to become like a cereal, have big tough stalk, and it's
you'll never dig it in.
No, it's horrible.
No.
I don't know if like often I've seen on sort of gardening forums people sort of saying I want to grow green manures, but I'm no dig, and green manures say you have to dig them in, so therefore I can't grow green manures. But you can adapt them quite well for a no dig situation. I'd certainly try and go for ones which are slightly softer. So I think grazing rye is perhaps not such a good one, but some of the softer ones like Phacelia, all of the clovers and things as well, they're quite nice and soft as well. And I do this in my own garden. I just chop them all up with a load of shears, and then stick some compost on top. If there's still some tough stems in there, I just hoik them out and put them in the compost heap. So you've just got sort of fine lush material in there mixed with the compost, and that seems to work pretty well. But you do need to mix it with compost. If you just leave it on the surface, it just turns into this horrible slimy green mat, and it's not it's a real smug mat.
Yeah, mulching on top's always a good idea, definitely.
Yeah. So sometimes you might have a sort of shorter gap in the summer where you've just got a bit of bare soil for, I don't know, a couple of months or something, and it's not time to put one of the more traditional green manures in. I'm particularly keen on using buckwheat during that time because it's just a real star, really. You just chuck the seed on the ground, and and within about sort of 4 or 5 weeks, you just got a massive sort of really tall plants, and then it starts flowering, and the bees and the hoverflies absolutely love them, and they're really quite soft as well, really easy to chop down as well. So I find that's a really good thing to grow. And what that's doing, buckwheat doesn't fix any nitrogen, it's not a legume, but it's you're just adding a load of really good organic matter to the soil, because you just, anything sort of green that's rotting down and going into the soil is a good thing. You're adding to your organic matter levels and improving its structure and all the biological life in there. So
I mean, in the summer months, everything's being dragged away from the soil. Everything's growing so rapidly and so hungry. Anything you can put back in is appreciated, and it's to support the ecosystem to keep it going as well.
It is, yeah. I mean, you'll just see that hoverflies absolutely love it as soon as it starts flowering as well. It's a really quick win, I think, and you can get a really big bag of seed quite cheaply as well.
So green manure, inherently in the past, hasn't been talked about so much, and new gardeners might not be aware. Why? What reasons might they not be growing green manure, or why might people not grow green manure in the gardening industry?
I think there's quite a few reasons, really. Partly, perhaps people just don't know about them; they don't think to do it. People just get so excited about growing all the veg that they don't think about investing in the soil for the future. People, perhaps a beginner gardener, might just think about the plants. They don't think about the whole system that they're growing in. And organic growing is very much thinking about your whole environment, not just the little plants that you're growing stuff to eat. So if you don't look after your soil, you know, sort of next year's yields are not going to be so good, and they're going to be even worse the year after that. So you need to think of green manures as an investment in your sort of future growing. So it's worth, even if you've got quite a small space, just to put some of it aside for growing green manures as well. The other reason, I think, is that really most green manures, it's best to put them in sort of early autumn, late summertime, and often people just don't want to do that because they're still harvesting I don't know, runner beans or courgettes or whatever, and they don't want to rip those out just to sow a green manure at that time. And that's understandable. I can see why they wouldn't want to do that. But so we looked at some ways of getting around that. And it's a technique that's called undersowing, and it takes a little bit of getting the balance right. But once you get the hang of it, I think it works quite well. We've tried it. So I'll just explain what undersowing is. So I'll give a practical example. So if you were going to be growing some, let's say you've got going to be growing some climbing French beans, and so in sort of May sort of time, you'd be putting out your climbing French bean plants, taking them out of their pots, putting them in the soil. At the same time, what you can do is sow a low-growing green manure that's not too vigorous. So I quite like going for either yellow trefoil, which is quite low-growing, or go for a really small-leaf variety of white clover. And then what you do is you just let the beans grow up. They will grow tall, and they will shade the clover or the trefoil, and so it won't be growing very much. That sort of clover or trefoil would just stay quite sort of low growing whilst your beans are growing. So you're harvesting your beans all summer, and then what happens is in the autumn, when you take down your beans, you then already have your clover growing and ready there for the winter. You've already established it, so that works really, really well. The thing you've got to be aware of is you don't want the clover to grow too well, because it might compete against the beans. If you find that happening, you could just go over it with some shears, just cut it back a bit, and clover will always come back. It's it's quite happy to. So it's getting that balance between the two. But we tried it with lots of our members, and they got on with it pretty well. And this establishment of your winter green manure is just so much better than if you try to sow it in late autumn. If you try and sow it in late autumn, you just end up with a few scrappy plants. It won't cover the soil or do any good at all. So that's one way of getting around it. You almost have your cake and eat it. You can be harvesting your beans till late, and you've got a green manure over the winter.
I love that.
It's something that's been done with organic cereal growers for quite a long time. What they will do is, if they sow a spring cereal, they will sow some white clover into it at the same time. And then when they harvest the cereal in the autumn, they then got their green manure for the winter. But it's not being done commercially with vegetable growers very, very much. Perhaps because it's a bit fiddly to do, but
maybe they're a bit not impatient, but it's a bit of like it takes too much time.
most certainly you've got time to fiddle around with things, haven't
No,
you?
exactly. Just want to get it done. I like the idea of the clover as undersowing, because it also helps to suppress weeds as well, which is amazing. They work very well with that. I know some people look on their lawns, for instance, they see clover as a weed, but actually they hold a lot more benefits than they do being called a nuisance plant or a weed. So it's better off leaving them there. They're really good. But yeah, in your
Definitely.
vegetable patch, definitely.
I mean, the white clover as well, it produces nectar at a time when quite a lot of other plants aren't flowering as well. So it's really, really quite useful for the bees. Both the bumblebees and honeybees will go for it as well. So it's a nice plant. So green manures also have a benefit that a lot of them produce really quite pretty flowers. Ideally, you don't want them to sort of flower too much so they're getting to the podding stage and producing seeds, but you certainly can let them put on a bit of a display of flowers. And there's lots of different types which produce really very pretty flowers. So I think my all-out favourite is crimson clover. It just produces the most beautiful sort of scarlet red flowers. They look really, really good.
They are lovely.
Bees love them. There's one that's slightly less well known that's called Persian clover, and that produces these sort of little purple flowers, but when you look at it from above, you've got a great big sea of purple, and that actually has quite a strong smell of sherbet as well. So that's a really nice one. I'll just have to say, I remember we were doing a green manure trial in a farmer's field a while back. It was out in the fens near Ely. And we just had this strip of crimson clover next to a strip of Persian clover, and you could see the cathedral in the background, and it was just the most amazing sight. So it's just a memory that sticks in my head. There's quite a few others as well. I mean, Phacelia is a really good one for attracting insects. It's particularly the honeybees like the Phacelia, the one sort of insects with slightly shorter tongues, and so it's like catnip for bees, really. Basically, as soon as there's a bit of sun on there and they're releasing their sort of scent, then it'll just be absolutely plastered in bees. So that's a really good one for attracting insects. So I've got this vision that you might have almost like a permanent bed of green manures as well, and you could just take the cuttings and the clippings and bung them in other places as well. So that could be another way of using them. So something like, you might want one that's perennial growing then. So something like lucerne or alfalfa, they're both the same thing, different names. So that's quite a tall plant with really beautiful purple flowers on it. And that's something you could just cut back sort of quite frequently and put the clippings onto beds to sort of use as a mulch, and they gradually release their nutrients. So
nice green mulch to break down.
Yeah.
I know you were talking about buckwheat earlier, and it's in the flowers on those as well. The hoverflies love them, or the dragonflies.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it's so different sort of bees like different flowers. So I mean, the bumblebees have got the longer tongues, and they like things like comfrey, and the things like hoverflies got shorter tongues, and they like all the sort of, they particularly like the things in the carrot family as well, like all the sort of coriander and
the multiple flowers. When they have multiple flowers on one head, they tend to go for those a lot more as well, which is quite interesting. So it just goes to show that actually green manure can offer more benefits. It's a bit more diverse. The benefits it can offer range beyond soil care. It can actually attract in the beneficial insects, which will then have a knock-on effect to the rest of the garden, helping you to help and pollinate the garden, helping to manage pest and disease damage as well. So it supports the entire ecosystem with one little plant, which is amazing, or one patch of little plants as well, which is quite incredible, really, how it can all work to support. But it's definitely well worth trying if you haven't already.
Definitely, it used to be a regular part of our farming system, so I think we need to bring them back into our gardens as well.
Definitely, absolutely. Okay, so I'd like to touch a little bit, if possible, on garden organic. So this is where you come from. This is your world. Can you tell us a little bit about how you support as garden organic, how you support the industry, how you support gardeners? Tell us a little bit more.
Okay, so Garden Organic is actually a membership organisation. We have just over 20,000 members. We support people in lots of ways. We support gardeners to garden organically by giving them out information and help and support. We do a lot of work with community growers around the country as well. So although we're based just outside Coventry. A lot of the people employed by Garden Organic are actually based at sort of lots of other places around in sort of Wales and Norfolk, Cumbria, all sorts of places. We also have quite a lot of volunteer networks as well. So we get people who want to sort of promote the message of organic gardening and also the message of composting. Home composting is a very important part of organic gardening. Yeah. Yeah, we work on what's called a sort of volunteer mentor scheme. So in English, that means you're more likely to listen to your friends and neighbours than to listen to sort of official government messages. I think you're more likely to pay attention to someone that tells you something down the pub than someone that puts a leaflet through your door. So that's how it works, basically.
That's too true.
Yeah. We have a lot of other activities. We have a heritage seed library, which is a really unique thing, certainly for the UK. So we hold a collection of heirloom varieties, which basically these are sort of varieties that people have saved their own seed from. And we have over 800 of these varieties, and we make them available to the public. And these varieties, because they're no longer on the national list, wouldn't be available to people otherwise. We're not legally allowed to sell these varieties because they're not on the national list, they're not registered officially. So what happens is you pay to belong to the library, and then you can access the seeds that way. And we actually have people who will take seeds out, and then they will grow them, multiply them up, and then return some seed back to the library. So it really does behave like a library.
Yeah, that's such a good idea as well, because it keeps everything. It's seeds that you wouldn't necessarily not available anymore. The heritage ones, it's keeping them alive, keeping them growing, and they don't get forgotten about.
What I like about it is it's actually a living collection. It's not just like a load of things that have been frozen in a big vault in the Arctic. It's actually being grown by communities.
Yeah.
And we do make sure that these sort of more difficult varieties, the ones which sort of cross with each other, those are done on site. We keep them isolated in polytunnels. But some of the easier ones, like tomatoes, don't tend to cross hardly at all. So we can give those out to the public to be able to multiply.
Yeah, that's such a good idea, and I love the fact that people give them back as well. So you're constantly refreshing the stock, if you like, and so it's nice. I love that. Such a good idea.
We have a small research program where we do citizen science. We get people to do small experiments in their back gardens, and they send the results back to us. So that's just as much about public engagement as with issues, as well as the sort of the results that we get back as well.
I like that.
In fact, that's how the whole organisation started in the 1950s. There's a very innovative man called Lawrence Hills. He saw that there basically wasn't much research being done in organic gardening, and he particularly wanted some science to back some of the claims that organic gardening was making. There's no funding at the time, so he set up lots of sort of amateur gardening groups to do these experiments. So he really sort of went in for citizen science in a big way, and all these groups sort of reported back. They had meetings, and it's all published in a sort of very dusty, typed out newsletter and circulated around to people.
Very efficient, very proper.
So, and this has been going for 65 years now, these experiments in people's back gardens. I don't think any organisation has got a sort of heritage like it, really. It's quite unique.
I love it, and it keeps people's interest in the membership and in the whole community of the whole organic gardening when they're involved in it and involved in the science behind it as well. I love that.
It is great. More recently, we're trying to go for a more sort of co-created approach as well. So we've actually set up a group of sort of gardeners, and it's a unique group. We've got a mixture of gardeners and academics from universities. We meet up once a month, have a chat over Zoom about how we're going to take forward the sort of research, and so we're making sure that it's really relevant to gardens and communities as well by having their input. It's been great. It's really enjoyable, and quite sort of just having that input from a range of people as well. It helps you sort of think much wider than just having a few of us putting our ideas together.
Yeah, and it keeps it more relevant to what's going on in like here and now as well, rather than having a small group of you that are always together, always thinking about the same things. Giving it more of a diverse range of people, you're getting a whole mixture. It's quite a good way of doing it, really.
Definitely, yeah, it's quite an eye-opener as well.
Exactly, that's it. So hearing all of that makes me very interested, obviously. But how can we find out more, and how can we follow you? Where are you, social media wise and things?
Okay, so we have a website. So the easiest thing is just to type in Garden Organic into any sort of search. We're on Facebook, and we're even on TikTok now. That's the latest thing. So yeah,
I haven't found you on TikTok yet. I found you on YouTube, but I haven't found you on TikTok. I'm gonna have to look for
we're
you.
new to that. Yeah, we have a podcast as well. That's really popular. That comes out on the first day of every month, so that's really worth it. And we have a little sort of gardening discussion in the potting shed to start off with, and we normally have a guest speaker who might be on site, and then we also we have a sort of post bag as well, people with their sort of questions and things. So,
Oh, I love that.
yeah, it's really nice.
That's perfect. Fab. So yeah, social media, you're on, as I say, TikTok. I'm going to totally find you on TikTok. Found you on YouTube. All the links I will post in the description, so everyone can access that, so you can check those out after the stream. Okay, so we know how we can join. We know I can follow you on social media. Is there anything else? Have you got a newsletter that we can join to get more information and more hints and tips?
Yeah, we have a monthly newsletter called Organic Matters, and it really has got lots of sort of news about organic gardening and growing and how you can get involved as well. So that's quite a nice way to just have a little bit more information. That's quite a few gardening tips as well. So definitely worth signing up for that.
So that's emailed out, and they can sign up for that on the website.
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'll leave a link to the website in the description, so you can find the newsletter on there. Okay. So all the links Anton has just provided for us will be posted in the description at the end of this video, so you can check them out later. If you've got any questions, please feel free to post below. Absolutely fine. We'll comment on them as we go, as we see them. So that's fine. Wherever you're watching from today, if you've enjoyed the show, if you've enjoyed what we've been talking about, give us a thumbs up. Whether it's on Facebook or YouTube, give us a thumbs up. If you're watching on YouTube, click the subscribe button to see more from myself, Gardening Naturally Green Fingertips, and to support the channel. So thank you for watching. Thank you to Anton. And we will see you again next week for the next Natural Gardening Live.
Thank you, Josie.
Thank you for joining me today. You can find out more Green Fingertips goodness over in our membership at green-fingertips.co.uk/membership to find out more. Keep up with all the latest news by following me on social media. That's green_fingertips. And follow me on YouTube to watch all my latest videos.